Was there anything that came up with the Sydney Zen Center's annual meeting that went over that happened this past weekend?
With our annual general meeting?
Hmm.
Oh, well, we had the chairperson's report. Only the chairperson's in France, so it was given by a person who's not normally the chairperson standing in. And then some of the teachers gave their reports, which was interesting. And what else did we do? The treasurer's report. That was interesting. They're all interesting. But the treasurer's report was very interesting in the sense that over the last several years, we've had a loss. We've been going at a loss. And so last year they determined to change that. And so we've increased the sort of the membership fees, and we've increased session fees. And so we're sort of hoping. And I think this year we actually made a tiny, tiny, tiny little profit. So we didn't go down in the red more. So, but I mean, we have an orientation schedule every month. People, there's an invitation on the web to come and have an orientation. And we get 10, 12, 15 people every month. But the percentage of those who return is really, like lurking around 25%. It's not something people really, really think they want to do. Not the majority of people. But nevertheless, some people are, and quite a few young people are interested, which is great
Yeah,
in
wonderful.
this time of digital everything. I think, and then my co-teacher, one of my co-teachers, Savannah, said she thinks it's people are still relieved to get to be with people in a dojo rather than on Zoom, because Zoom's so well. It has terrific. I mean, it's terrific when you've got nothing else, but apart from that, there's this real lack of a sense of personal interaction and intimacy, and it's lacking, obviously. So we're out of that now. We don't have to have Zoom. We still do it. We still make it available for people who can't come. But yeah, hopefully that's true, and hopefully we'll have young people will be interested. But who knows? We just don't know. What do you think? I mean, what's your sense about the fact that everything's able to be done on your iPhone? Why would you actually physically go to a building, physically mingle with other people, listen to real bells ring, when you could do it all on your iPhone in a park? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking. I find that there is something very important about, because I come from a Soto Zen background,
Yeah.
and it's relatively new. I'm developing it, and I'll listen on YouTube. There's a lot of great resources out there for
Oh,
Dharma talks from you name it, sangha leaders or people in various Soto Zen centers around the world that you
yeah.
can plug into, and that's a really wonderful resource. But there's something about seeing and interacting with other people in a practice way, or in a practice center, that is really important. But also too, there's something that the sangha that I am mostly connected to, there's a big uh, cleanup practice too. So you'll sit zazen, and then you'll sweep up around the temple, or you'll put things away, or you'll vacuum, or you'll do like a cleaning of the bathroom, or whatever's needed to be done. You kind of put your hand on it, and it's hard to do that digitally. You just kind of clean your own house, and that's nice. But
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
there's something about being able to really uh, improve upon or better the temple, so that the next person that comes in can enjoy that, but also too, just for the benefit of the temple, to be at the condition that the best condition that it can be, is also very important. So I hear you on that. Like, there's definitely make digital available, but there's something about the contact and the being around people that's hard to replicate digitally, I think.
Absolutely agree. But so you must be sitting in the daytime. Otherwise, you wouldn't finish your sit and then go out and clean the toilet.
Right.
In the,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Well,
yeah. Because
and
we sit at night.
no,
We
sorry,
have
what?
our sits are at night.
Oh,
So
I see.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So we don't we don't add on cleaning after a sit, we have a cup of tea and then we go home.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, yeah. But that's important too, though, that sharing that tea is also
Oh,
very
it's
important.
really important. Yeah, that's critical. People
Well,
can sort of, be normal people and talk.
yeah.
That's what we don't, we want to talk to each other. Oh, who are you? Why are you here? What are you? Right. Yeah. Made
Well,
so many friends are made through, sangha. It's wonderful. Just wonderful.
yeah. And then when you do break it down from, doing something a little bit more formalized, which is like a sitting, and then you go into tea, do you feel like it's a different type of tea than you would have with your friends that are not necessarily Sangha members or family or whoever it is? Did you think like there's a carrying of what was happening in sitting into a conversation at tea with Sangha members?
I do feel that, but it's certainly we're not talking about practice. Our
Mm,
cup of tea, but the practices what we have in common. So there's a basis for a sense of openness and a sense of um, interest in the other person more perhaps than if we just sort of randomly met them at some other function, because we have this shared, we're sitting together and it's wonderful and it's sort of enriching, and so we there's a trust there, I think, that's very deep, and I really appreciate it.
oh, good. Yeah. And you also outside of the I believe it's like the Annandale Zendo, you have
Yeah,
a really beautiful special place, Kodaji, I believe.
but Kodoji.
Kodoji, excuse me. And the
Yeah.
Temple of the Ancestral Ground, and that is
The
about
ancient ground,
and that's
temple.
of the ancient ground, sorry, of the
Yeah,
ancient
yeah,
ground.
no worries. Yeah,
And that's about 2 or 3 hours outside of
yeah, a
Sydney.
couple of hours. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's through sort of like going through inner suburbs, more outer suburbs, farmy sort of places. Then we're in wilderness, and that's where we are in wilderness. So
Yeah.
it used to
And
be, cattle. Used to be cattle grazing. Was it the valley was given to? Well, sorry, the valley is called Gorrick's Run. We've always known it as Gorrick's Run, and then Roshi said we're going to have to give it a name. So we came up with that one. But Isaac Gorrick was a convict, and he was sent out here for something. I'm not sure what he did wrong. And after about 20 years here, the convicts, if they were well-behaved convicts, they were offered land to take up as long as they did stuff on the land. They had to turn into sort of small farmers or something. So it became a cattle run from about 1820. And so, and then when we sort of found the land, it was just, there were still cattle in the valley, but now there are no cattle in the valley. So
mm.
it's weekenders. It's turning into weekenders and Airbnbs and that sort of thing. It's getting sort of it's changed. Yeah,
And
but it's
I wanted to ask too, because like, part of the because I know you had a hand in putting together the literal foundation of that temple space and of that center, or that satellite of your center, but you also are interested in bush regeneration and also just climate awareness and bringing in maybe not maintaining it in the way that it was for a cattle run back in the day. So what has that experience been like, where you're kind of interacting with nature, kind of allowing it to kind of crawl back and blossom again?
oh, it's wonderful work. Bush regeneration work is wonderful work, and I'm just passionate about it. But just winding back to the previous part of what you were saying, um, my beloved husband, who died 2.5 years ago, with me. I mean, we walked this path together. Our sort of journey, if you like, was, hand in hand, arm in arm, all the way through. So, about 3 or 4 of us sort of went up to the land and just loved it and said, let's buy it, and pooled, little bits of money. It wasn't very expensive back then. And then he got the planning. He did all the plans. He's an architect and builder, and he did all the plans and got it through council. And he then led SAMU, which is what you call your work thing SAMU? No, you don't.
Not my particular sangha, at least, but we just call it cleanup time. But
Okay.
but maybe Samu, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So once a month for 30 something years, a group sometimes very just Tony and me and our dog, but other times a few more. We just go up there and work and build and build and build and build until it was done. So that's how it was a sangha it was a total process of sangha building as well as hojo dojo building. That was building connection. And some people even learned how to build their own house from being with Tony, because he was a very good teacher about building. We had done that build in America in 1982. We'd gone over with our son, who was 10 at that point, to help build the Ring of Bones Zendo in California, because Gary Snyder and a wonderful Japanese poet turned up at our Zendo, our dojo, when it wasn't in Annandale, it was in another place, and they read poetry. They were out here on a tour with the Australia Council, which is a cultural exchange thing. And Gary then at the end of the poetry reading just said, oh, by the way, you know, we're building a dojo, you know, anyone wants to come over. So we did, and it was great. But they built it in a month. All these people came together. They had fabulous teams of really good builders who are also Buddhist practitioners. And it just went from nothing pretty much to the most beautiful building in a month. Well, we couldn't do that. We didn't have that sort of skilled, all that, those numbers. We just couldn't do it like that. We had to do it once a weekend a month for years and years and years. So, but that was where we had our first experience of an amazing sangha of creative people, of artists, of singers, of storytellers, of dancers. I mean, it was amazing. Our house was very quiet, and at that point, tiny little sangha in Sydney. Very, very, not at all like that. So we came back thinking, oh, okay, you know, Buddhist sanghas can be alive, you know, they can be marvelous. They can be expressions of amazing, you know, skill and joy. And so, yeah, it was a real eye opener in every way, for us. Yeah, it was great.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Um,
You been to
it,
that dojo, Ring of Bone?
no,
It's
so mhm.
it's up at it's up in the up behind where those gold fields were way back, and they did hydraulic gold mining, and they had huge hoses, and they went when they just blasted the gold out of the ground, left a mess, you know. But anyway, it's a great, beautiful, wonderful dojo, and really worth a visit. But it's not Soto.
Oh, right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's a part of the Diamond Sangha uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
group as well. And no, I haven't been myself, but I understand that it's in the Sierra Nevada foothills. And in preparation for our talk today, I took a look around it, and I believe Nelson Foster is involved with it,
Yeah.
and it does really look beautiful. Like I've only seen little pictures here and there, but you know, with Kodoji,
Yeah.
it's a smaller building, yet it has a lot of those same elements of just kind of being placed, and then a lot of like open kind of window spots, so you can kind of let in a lot of different uh nature vistas, but also just allowing the building itself to be surrounded by the bush. You know, you have that quality, absolutely.
Yeah, and a
Um,
big brand of kinhin. Do you do kinhin in Soto?
that is
I'm
the
using these words that I think that they translate into Soto. I don't know. But it's walking meditation. But we do
mhm.
after 25 minutes of sitting, we always, that's the end of our sit, and then we always do 5 or 10 minutes of kinhin and then sit down again. So we use the big wide veranda. So people sleep on it in sesshin, then they shove their mattresses against the wall, and then we use it for kinhin, you know, all day and in the night. And outside is just, actually we're on a paddock, like a flat paddock. It used to be bush, but you know, obviously when the cows came, they cut all the trees down. So that the actual wilderness bush just goes up behind us, across here, there, but back. So fortunately, we're on this paddock which we mow and get slashed, because we, you know, just narrowly missed being burnt down completely in the last bushfire, you know, which I think you're having a few bushfires over there too, but they're going to get worse and worse. So we, you know, we just don't know how long we'll have the building. Who knows? We just don't
Mm.
know. We were talking about that at the board meeting, about having to actually revise the value of the place, and then we'll have to revise the insurance. It's going to be monstrously high revision because the insurers are just raking it in here. If you're anywhere near a flood zone or a bushfire zone, they're just upping the premiums. So that's what's happening. That's what's happening in terms of money and finance. So it'll be harder and harder to be able to sort of, cover ourselves. But that's what's going to be happening. So in terms of bush regeneration, we're not allowing the trees and the bush to come back around the dojo and the hojo or the toilet buildings or whatever because of the bushfire danger. So we're keeping it really slashed. So there's space for the fire brigade to come in and, do what they need to do. But down by the creek, there's a lovely creek running through, and there's been an infestation of blackberries there, which you probably have them, and they're lovely and they're delicious, but they're a weed. And they stop the native vegetation coming back. So we've been working for many, many years to just say goodbye to it. And also lots of other weeds like annuals so that the native vegetation has a chance to come back, which is what bush regeneration is, because the soil that contains bush plant seeds which can live in the soil for over 100 years. So if you clear space for them, so there's air and light, they just come back. It's magic. So that's what's happening. Yeah, I'm sure it's the same in America. I don't know how long. I don't know, but that's what it is here.
Yeah, I didn't realize that the longevity of bush native plants would be able to just give them some space, and they can store themselves quite well until it's time for them to, or there's space for them to show back up. And I certainly know that feeling of dealing with taking out some blackberry bushes and all that. Yeah, they're delicious, but it's a prickly business to kind of get them out. And well, and that too, as you go about dealing with invasive species,
Yeah.
and then as like within a uh Buddhist area, like within the guise of like a Buddhist place, and you're working
Yeah.
with invasive species, what is weeding like, and how like do you say goodbye to it, right? You do
Yeah.
something to them to say, well, this is, thanks for being here, but this is not your
Right.
spot.
That's right.
Off you go.
That's right. Exactly. That's exactly what happens. Thank you for being here. Sometimes, no, not sometimes. I never feel sad about saying goodbye to weeds. They have to go. It's like invasive species of creatures. We've got millions and millions and millions of feral cats killing millions and billions of native birds, native lizards. I mean, it's just a nightmare. The native cat, they're not native cats, they're feral cats. And they're all over Australia because they've just bred and they've found things to eat, which is really sad. I mean, there are feral goats, there are feral deer, there are feral dogs, pigs, just all these creatures rabbits, that was the worst thing, because the British thought, well, they'll be nice out here. They brought the rabbits to Australia, and boy, did the rabbits love it. So we're just constantly having to deal with, it's just ignorance. I mean, the people who came out had no idea, what they were looking at. They'd never seen eucalyptuses, and they didn't think they were as nice as English trees, because English trees were greener. So they weren't very interested in the wilderness. Some were, but mostly they weren't. And they just constantly cutting, slashing, getting rid of. Yeah.
Gosh.
So we're finding that there's a huge amount of regrowth right on the edge between the bush and the flat paddock. There's massive amounts of regrowth of eucalyptuses, and we actually have to go and just sort of say, sorry, it's not the right place for you, and tell them to go. It's not that they're a feral species, it's just that if they continue to grow up and become very large trees, then we'd be sort of making ourselves much more vulnerable to fire.
Yeah. because it's a conversation like that, the architecture and the life of a building or of like cityscapes or whatever it is. It ought to be more of a conversation. Sometimes people think it's more of like a shove and make room and all that, but you got to make sure that the environment can do what it needs to do to come back. But
Yeah,
also you need to protect your house. You need to protect your
well,
Zendo and Hodo
yeah.
and then I remember I watched a really nice short documentary about the Kodoji and how people will sleep on tents during sesshin, like you were saying, kind of on the veranda, but also maybe on some of the grass. And I think there's sometimes visits from wombats and kangaroos and things like that. Like, what is it like to kind of camp out? And
Hey, that's fantastic.
yeah,
We just come from a session and there were maybe 15 tents out on the paddock. So lots of people were out there and we didn't have any dramatic visitors. I mean, but there was wombats, but they're very shy animals. They don't sort of come and announce themselves. And there were koalas, boy koalas up the hill. You could hear them in the middle of the night. They sound like wild pigs. They grunt, and they're looking for a girlfriend. So they're sending out their call, and we hear that every spring. The koalas are calling out, and iguanas, which are lizards, which can grow like 3-4 meters. They're really big fellas, and they're around. They like our compost heap. They're very keen on that compost heap. We didn't see snakes. We have a lot of snakes. Some of them deadly. It's interesting. It's wild.
yeah. And that, we don't in California we have the rattlesnake, and
Yeah.
that I think is our native and only major poisonous snake in the state. But
Oh,
but you certainly have a fair share of different snakes like that that are venomous. And
yeah.
what is that like to camp outside?
You got to
While get
watch where you feet. You got
well,
to you got to have good sturdy boots.
mm,
So they might just come in, and you've got to have a torch, good strong torch. So you really, when at night particularly, you've just got to really watch where you're going. That's
yeah,
what's hard. But so far, touch wood, nobody's been bitten. That's quite a while. We've got that land in '85. Now it's nearly 2025, so that's quite a lot of years.
yeah, yeah.
No, no, no bites.
No bites,
Yeah,
yeah. Just
no bites yet.
well,
Yeah, yeah.
I
But
wish you.
it's good because I mean, part of session cautions is, there are snakes here and they live here. This is their habitat, so you look out for them. And so people become much more alert. It's great. So we don't have any internet up there. We've got a landline, but people can't use their mobiles. They can't have a look at social media. That doesn't exist up there, so that's great as well. But
eh,
they're talking about putting in a tower, so maybe it won't last very much longer. But it's a wonderful. Another element of why Seshin is really spectacularly brilliant because it shifts everything from being busy and distracted and you know to being quiet and having nothing to distract you. I mean, at all. And it's up to you to make full use of that brilliant gift, which is silence and quietness. And the birds are stunning as well. They're brilliant. The birds up there are just so good. Plus the frogs. I mean, there's 31 species of frogs in our creek. That's a lot of frogs.
Wow, wow! Just in that creek alone, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So we take a meditation walk down there in the dusk and stand by the creek, and they all go quiet because they know we're there. And then gradually, one by one, they come back on. Huge again. It's just magic. Beautiful. And the
Oh,
stars up there are fantastic because there's no other light source. So the stars are phenomenal. Anyway, I just love it up there, and it's a wonderful, wonderful place. And everybody who comes there and has this, well, not everybody. Some people shouldn't have ever thought they could come and do session, because really they can't because they haven't got the experience to do it. But they do try. They
mm.
do their best. Yeah. So you do session as well? Do you have session?
We have a session. It's a different type of session that my sangha typically does. It's not more of a not much of a retreat. They do like a working day session where you can go early in the morning, sit during the practice hours, and then go on, do your job, take care of your kids or whatever you need to do, and then come back in the evening.
Okay.
I've got a little one, so I haven't participated in that quite yet, but
Yeah.
it's I do think that there's something about that experience which is great, that more accommodating to a city
Yeah.
life
Daily life.
or
Yeah.
yeah,
We
it's
do that too. We have two of them, and then we have two full-on 7-day silent session out in the bush. So we
oh
have those things. Yeah.
yeah.
But I want to talk, apart from talking about my beloved Tony, who's the architect and 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 not slave driver, but encourager of people to pick up a hammer and nail it, to put a nail in. So my dad was an exporter and importer of things like wheat and rice and flour and stuff like that, all those commodities. And he was working importing into exporting into Asia, India, Singapore, Malaysia, Sri Lanka. So we had a lot of visitors to our place. I remember, a lovely Sikh guy came one day and took over the kitchen from my mother. he kept saying, Patsy, Patsy, let me be here. And he cooked us the most fantastic curries. And so that was normal for us. Asia was part of our ordinary home life, really. And the phone was always ringing, and it was always somebody saying, the such and such needs to be delivered. And that was our network at home. Also, then my grandmother, who's my mother's mother, was tragically widowed when my mother was only 3. It was a very early death. And she and I think some of her sisters became very interested in Asian teachers. And they had quite a bunch of books on our bookshelves from the time I was tiny about yoga and about meditation. And so that again was normalized. So although, you said you grew up in I can't remember your adjective, but it was not just a sort of just adjust, almost not, but a just Catholic growing up, childhood. I grew up in a family similar, only it was Anglican, which mum and dad didn't go to church, except maybe they did sometimes at Christmas or something. But we had to go to Sunday school, and we had to go. So we went to church schools, schools run by the church, not the Anglican church. But it wasn't forced on us. And I was a very religious little girl. And I remember sticking up a sign once by my bed saying, a quote from the Bible saying, "Thou shalt not live by bread alone, but by every word of God." And I was, people joked about it, that I was a silly little girl, but I was sort of always interested in well, what is this? What is this? What's this? What is this religion? And you could sort of feel joy and some sort of transcendence singing in that church. And so that's the sort of creature I was. I was also very curious and very bold and very didn't take no for an answer either. And so yeah, Tony and I found our way to India very early on, 66, 67, something like that. And went back and back and back, went a lot to India. But and that was all through the 70s and getting into the 80s. But there was no connection with any of the famous gurus who seemed to be coming to Australia a lot. And they were just sort of like charismatic showmen in a way. They were people were far too adoring. Tony and I used to stand back and think, and the gurus that throw lollies to people, they'd all fall on the lollies. Do you remember that? You're probably too young for that. It was a whole period.
Yeah, I mean, I know that was a there was the same time the Beatles were kind of doing their thing. There,
Ashram, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. Actually, today in our not a local, but in the main paper of New South Wales called the Sydney Morning Herald, there's this huge article about breathing and how it's the in Bhagwan, no, not Bhagwan, it's another one. It's not Ravi Shankar, the sitar player, but Ravi Shankar, who teaches breathing and yoga. And he's coming to Australia, and he's going to teach all these heads of corporations how to breathe. I just can't believe it. And it said breathing used to be a sort of a fringe activity, not breathing per se, but special breathing used to be a fringe activity. Now it's become mainstream. Yeah, everything becomes mainstream. So this person's coming out to teach breathing and meditation to people who are stressed, because there's an enormous amount of anxiety in our culture at the moment. Massive. It's just, I would think there might be some in your society as well, but I'm only guessing, seeing as you
No,
have an election coming up.
sure. Oh boy, yeah. No, there we could use some breathing. All of us. Uh,
Uh,
so you found yourself in India, kind of exploring more of these yogic techniques, whether they be the embodied yoga or the breathing yoga, and also the philosophy and things like that. Those were kind of inspiring to you in a certain
So
way.
we were mainly visiting buildings because Tony's an architect. So we're mainly going to fabulous ancient sites. I mean, that's what. But we did go down to Pondicherry because a friend of ours, two friends of ours from Sydney, had gone there to live. And so we thought, we'll go and see them. And Pondi is an ashram, a vast, beautiful ashram. And at that point, the mother had just died. She was sort of the female part of the ashram, but she died. And there was just a sense of, quite a lot of grief around, and but it was a fascinating, amazing culture in this vast ashram. I mean, they had, anyway, I won't go down the track of it, but it's called Auroville. And so we went back to Auroville several times. When our little boy was 3, was the last time we took him there. And I bought the books by Aurobindo Savitri was one of them, and they're about meditation and sort of, but in quite complex, unfamiliar language. So it was a bit of a hard read. I couldn't really relate to it. And Tona and I tried, but we couldn't. But we did start doing yoga lessons here in Sydney with a guy who was a professor of Hindu religion at the university, and a really good yogi. And he ran a really long class, and we ended up with meditation at the end of it. And was pranayama, so it was alternate nostril breathing, complex breathing things, not just breathing. And at the end of the night, he always said, because he had these connections with people through his work, he'd say, do you want to meet? Do you want to come and listen to a Ravi Shankar? Well, it wasn't Ravi, but it was somebody rather like that. A piece playing at my place, or anyway, one time he said, would anyone like to meet a Zen Roshi? He'll be at my place on Sunday. And Tony went, yeah, let's do that. So that's how we first encountered Aitken Roshi. And our friend, this guy who's our yoga teacher, just lives up the river. We live on a river here, and through the bushes, that's where he and his lovely wife live. So there we had a sit, and then Roshi sort of got to his feet. We didn't know which one was the Roshi. We kept thinking, which one's the Roshi? Which one is he? Anyway, it turned out he was the older type of one with rather baggy jeans and absolutely no charisma. It was not interested in charisma. He was just a quiet, shy sort of person. And he said, well, we're having a session, it's places if anyone would like to come. So Tony went, never having, done any more than maybe 2 periods of sitting just at home. And I couldn't go. We had our little boy was, he was 8, I think, at that point. And so Tony went, and it said on the piece of paper that you were to wear a robe. So he thought, well, I've got my dressing gown. That would be a robe. So he wore his dressing gown throughout the session. And he came back glowing. I couldn't. And I said, why are you so happy? What's happened? And he couldn't really say. But he did manage to say, well, the meal service was so wonderful because you ate your meal and then you washed your bowl right there, and then you wrapped your bowls up and then you put them behind your seat, and then next meal you opened them and you did it all again. He just loved the sort of the way it was so thought through, and so not adding to sort of more and more chaos and mess. Anyway, so next time I tried to go because I thought I'll go next time, and they wouldn't let me. The people in charge of the Sydney Zen Centre, which was about, I don't know, three people, said, no, you can't come because you haven't been before. I thought, that's going to be hard. How am I going to ever do it if I can't come because I've never been? Anyway, finally I got to go, and that was how we started sitting with them. Roshi, he only came out once a year, so it wasn't like he was there for us much. You just had to do your own practice, and then he'd come, and he was just wonderful. He was so patient and kind. So yeah, and we were doing our session in a home for retired nuns down south of Sydney, and there's lots of, Jesus was on the wall a lot, and crosses, and there were nuns there that come in for the Dharma talks and listen, and so we were surrounded by Catholicism. So it was a sense of, wouldn't it be great if we had our own place and we could just we could just go there, and that's how the impetus to sort of get some land came from that. Anyway, that's a long digression, but
No,
he
that's
was.
amazing. Yeah.
So the people those 3 or 4 people who started sitting together in the 70s, maybe mid-70s, wrote to 3 different Zen people saying, please come and visit us, please come, and only got a reply from one, and that was Aitken. So he was keen to come down, and he kept coming until about 1986 or so, 7 or so, I think, yeah. A couple of years he couldn't go, so Joko Beck came over and we sat with Joko. And then he gave transmission to an Australian student called John Tarrant, and he came to Australia for 5 more years, and then he handed over to Sabana, and then he didn't come anymore, and now there's about 6 teachers in our particular Sydney Zen Centre. So it's quite a lot of teachers.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, especially coming from a teacher that would come just once a year across the way to now have a
Yeah,
more or less self-sufficient community, a center that
that's
has
that's
teachers
right.
that can, um, you know, imagining what one person can do as a teacher. Now you have 6, and so that's just like, it really opens it up in a really
Yeah.
beautiful way. And did you find working and learning and practicing with Aitken Roshi that there was something that of his character or the way that he went about practice that was particularly enriching, or that you felt particularly connected to, or was it just kind of the entire thing, like all aspects of how he approached his practice, or how he communicated his understanding of things was just like wholesale, exactly what you needed in that moment?
Good question. I'm looking at a picture of him now. Um, I love the fact that he was, I mentioned trust before, and how Tony and I found him completely trustworthy and a man of great integrity, and his actions and his words were always congruent. And that was just, I mean, he embodied the teaching. Um, and you felt you could, get on with it. I mean, we weren't looking to him particularly for inspiration or anything, but he was reliably trustworthy and reliably embodying the Buddhist path, and that was clear. So when he said, okay, he gave me, and I think Tone too, the practice he gave most to beginners was, the very simple practice of breath counting. Which I think we both did for a couple of years, until we thought we might have developed enough attention to move across to a koan. And so whatever he said was fine by us. There was no, not that we had anybody else to compare him with at all. There was no other Zen teacher in Australia. There never had been. And then there was no online to check out anybody. That was it. There wasn't hardly any books at that point either. I mean, Joko Beck's books came out in the 80s, I think. Roshi had his lovely little book, Taking the Path of Zen, which was a great book. but there were very few Zen books then, and he was our person, and I was fascinated by his own journey to Zen, which had come through poetry, and he, is very, very amazing as life offers these synchronicities unbidden. So he's a conscientious objector. He's working on Guam, trying to build an airport. Guam gets overrun by Japanese. All the people working on the airport are hauled over to Japan. He's put in a civilian camp, and just has to, do whatever. But he's learning Japanese. I mean, this is the thing. He's open. He's learning Japanese. He's reading whatever he can. There's a library in this camp. I think it was once part of a school. And then a guard says, "You might like this book," and hands him R.H. Blythe's Zen in English Literature, which of course Roshi reads cover to cover to cover. He just keeps on reading. He's amazed by it. And then the two camps decide to combine. And there is R.H. Blythe, the author of this book, in the same camp as Aitken Roshi. And they start having an ongoing tutorial for the rest of the time they're imprisoned. And I mean, amazing coincidences. Then he goes to uni and does his MA in haiku. So he's come through poetry and literature, and I'm very interested in poetry and literature. So that was another sort of connection for us. And extraordinary. He was such a gentle, quiet man, and I loved his wife as well. We both adored her.
Oh, good.
She was
Yeah. I believe I've read Taking the Path of Zen, and I read like like short quotes from a Zen master or something like that, miniatures of a Zen master, both attributed to him. And I have some of his other works as well that I haven't quite dived yet into, but um the that story of coincidence, of that synchronicity, is
oh
just
yeah,
amazing. What an
oh yeah,
amazing story.
it's so great. It's
Yeah.
so, I mean, that's how things are. I mean, the same as like we just happen to be practicing yoga with John, who just happens to have met Roshi at international conferences. So therefore, they've got friendship. And he just happens to say, anyone want to meet? It's like, really? And that was interesting too, because Tony and I were sort of, we live in this part of Sydney that was quite settled by the French early, like 1830s, 40s. And it's got a lot of heritage, beautiful old stone buildings here, and that was a time of rampant development happening in Sydney, and they were knocking down these old, beautiful stone houses to build very bland, very boring, terrible apartment buildings. And so Tony and I were part of a movement to try and resist that. And he decided to stand for the local council, and he put out the word that he was going to stand. And this guy who we didn't know sort of suddenly turned up and said, "Can I help you? I'll help you do whatever you want me to do." And it was the professor of Hinduism who became our yoga teacher, and then introduced us to Bhagavad. You know what I mean? It's like the way the path unfolds is unknown. It's not nobody's controlling it. It's just flowering, beautifully flowering. I think that's the way it goes. Well, here in Sydney, it's the way it went then. Now we have, as I said, orientations every month, and then they get a free night at Annandale. Instead of having to pay $10 every night, they get a free night, and we study the precepts, a different precept every 2 months on the full moon, and on the other month when we're not studying a precept, we have a Q&A for newbies, and it's a good sharing circle. But so it's a different process now. And students come in to see me in Dokistan, and they say things like, "Oh, I've got a koan." And I say, "Well, who gave you the koan?" "Oh, I just decided I wanted to do it." It's so different. It's very interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
anyway.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. And just briefly on that, that the way of life, that blossoming of life, it has blossomed for you in the stories that I'm hearing in such a beautiful way. And there's something to following your interests that you've been doing, that, where it's like, well, there's these buildings that are coming up, I don't like that. So, though it's not, the interest is to stop the thing from happening, but like the go-getter, the activism, that part of you led to a lot of these chance encounters that, and that curiosity, you fed that curiosity and that led to certain things, just like how the curiosity of Aiken Roshi, how he went about feeding it, and also just the universe just kind of been like, well, here's the author right there. You're going to be in the same camp as the author, so you had questions, we've got
Yeah,
answers. Um and and then too, like, because I know that you yourself are creative. Like, so Aiken Roshi has an interest in poetry. You mentioned that
yeah,
you and Tony had an interest in poetry as well. And but you're a documentary filmmaker. And
yeah,
I watched parts of what were available online of The Awakening Bell, which is a documentary you made about Thich Nhat Hanh and his visit to Sydney.
yeah.
And it's what a remarkable thing to have made, and to how it could resonate in today's times, because Thich Nhat Hanh is such a massive figure. And you have footage of him back in the 80s or something like that, I think.
85, I think it was 80.
85.
I met him in Hawaii with Roshi. He was visiting Roshi, and we were having a retreat with him and with Sister Fong. Both of them were there. So I sort of connected with Thai there. We went on walking meditation up on that sort of memorial mountain or hill up behind Honolulu. Can't remember what it's called anyway. So then when I heard he was coming to Australia, I just thought, oh, I just got to get those two on camera because they're so amazing people. And it was quite hard. I mean, the Foreign Affairs Department obviously had negative stuff about Thai because he was, opposing. He was in opposition to obviously the war, and he was exiled from Vietnam for that. So it was really hard to get the clearance, but we finally got it, and he just at the last minute, and we were able to shoot it. And SBS, which was our multicultural broadcaster, which is government run, was the only place that would, pick up the tab, and it was like the budget was minuscule, but it was wonderful to do it, absolutely wonderful. But another sort of chance thing for me was when I was up at my family's got a place up in a beautiful, on the edge of a national park north of Sydney called Booty National Park, and it's got wild beaches and hills and everything. It's beautiful. And Tony and I helped my dad rebuild it. It was just a little shack, and we sort of lived up there for quite a while building it. And anyway, one day I was up there, 1979. I was there, and I think we were still camping on the veranda. And I was wrapping up some of the veggie scraps in the newspaper, the Sydney Morning Herald again, and my eye fell on an obituary, and it said, pioneer, lawyer, conservationist. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I read it, and I found that this was a woman who had just died, and who had built her own place in the early 30s, which she called ahimsa, which I knew meant was non-harming. I mean, I knew that. I thought, who would name their house ahimsa in the 1930s? Who is this woman? I just thought, I've got to find out more about this woman. And I just kept on thinking about it. I didn't hold on to the obituary. I just fascinated by it. She was the first woman lawyer in New South Wales. She was a conservationist who managed to save this beautiful bush, which I was on the edge of, from being turned into, suburbs. It's a national park. And her house was ahimsa. So I was musing aloud to my friend who lives up the river, who's the wife of John, who was the man who introduced us to Roshi. I was musing aloud to my friend. I said, look, I'm just fascinated by this woman. I can't remember her name. And she said, you're talking about Mari. I said, that's it, Mari. She said, oh, she was one of my closest friends, and I've got all her writing. And she pulled out box after box after box, and there was an archive of Mari's writing. She was a prolific writer. So then I started reading, and she was a very early Buddhist. In fact, she was one of the very earliest Buddhists in Australia. She was also mountain climbing. She did, she's always looking for virgin mountains to climb. She's pretty fearless. She failed to climb one in China, southern China, which she set her heart on climbing. And in that terrible disappointment, sort of through that, and around the edges of that, she met somebody who was practicing, an English person, and she then became very interested and went off to actually to sit in Burma in those little huts that you lived in by yourself and practiced alone. And she started doing that and kept on practicing and built a sort of a meditation hut on her property called the Hut of Happy Omen. So anyway, so Murray Biles was another sort of amazing sort of encounter, accidental, Oh, so
Yeah.
what I just feel is that how fortunate I have been. Tony and I have been so fortunate to have been able to follow our curiosities and able to, practice, have a practice and maintain that practice over all. I mean, he died. He wasn't sitting anymore, but I mean, he wasn't going formally sitting. He couldn't really leave the house that much, but he was, very, very, had a very calm and, I wouldn't say happy death, but it was unexpected. He just suddenly, he was there one night having his dinner with me, and the next morning when I woke him up for brekkie, he was gone. So it was a very subtle, sort of non-violent dying. And I have him to thank for most of our adventures, because I don't think I would have done them on my own, but he was, he was adventurous as well. So we're very fortunate to have each other to do those things. So it'd be probably easier now for a woman to do stuff like that. Well, Murray did it on her own, so it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm really sorry for the passing of Tony, and but though I'm so happy to hear about how much he inspired or brought adventure and that curiosity and feed and that intention to feed that curiosity and how
And
much.
it's got to
Yeah.
be a willingness. I mean, neither of us were pushing the other. We both of us just did so much. So we then at a certain point we said, why don't we build a dojo in the roof of the house? So then we lowered the ceilings and we put a stairway up, and then we've got a lovely little dojo that we made together, and that's great as well, because it's just a consecrated space for sitting, which is really good.
Yeah.
It's
You know,
so fortunate.
yeah, it's amazing. It really is amazing how much your both of your lives, but your life has involved living in being built spaces, like spaces under construction or spaces that are being remodeled, because there's this like, that way you don't have to, if you're out on the border of a national park, it's hard to kind of commute in from where you live already. So, you live on the property that you're building, and then same thing for the weekend trips that you probably have to you have to probably camp out while you're building that. So,
No,
um,
no other option. No other option.
yeah, and so it's a highly unique and I'm sure at times, difficult experience, but you have this architecture is very much woven into your life, and architecture, I mean, whether people know that or not, it really is it's a huge part of everyone's life. It's kind of this like quiet passive thing that everyone thinks is for granted, but the way that you maneuver through a space is all to people thinking that out. And
Yeah.
so I'm so happy to hear that, even with your home, but also like the part of your adventures uh have involved, you know, building sacred spaces and being there from the very foundation to the actual raising of it, and putting it where it can be a home for people to hear male koalas go nuts in the forest to attract a girlfriend of some sort. Um,
Yeah.
well, this has been such a wonderful conversation, and I know we're coming to a time here, but I wanted to ask just one more like kind of two-part question. They're both relatively open. One is like if there's anything that you're working on with the Sydney Zen Center, or if there's anything in particular that you are working on personally that you'd want to promote, or just have anyone learn more about, or have a get it more eyes and ears on, or if there's something, if not in that case, something like a cause or a foundation that you'd want to people to have a little bit more attention paid to. And then the other thing is there any advice that you would want to give to somebody who is walking the Buddhist path that you would have wanted to have heard when you were coming through it?
Interesting. In terms of the first question, having just come to the end of a session that I was sitting with for a couple of months, sort of feeling my way into what I wanted to talk about in the taste shows. I'm also I named a student here at the Sydney Zen Centre, and the Sydney Zen Centre, as an apprentice teacher 4 or 5 years ago. And what I'm dreaming up or sitting with is his transmission to become a Roshi, which will be hopefully sometime next year, but I'm not sure. We haven't sort of fixated on a date. So that's that's a project that he and I are working on. He's a wonderful, solid man who works as an anthropologist and an archaeologist, but mainly archaeology. And today he's down at where they've got a whole new airport, Western Sydney Airport, and they cleared all these farms, good farming land, and they're turning it into a great big suburb, which is sad. But they have to do checks on the land before they can build on it, that looking for Aboriginal elements of maybe artifacts or just anything. So that's what he's doing this week. He's down there with a group of Indigenous men and women who are working with him to sort of, dig and see and look. And that's what his work is. And he's very quiet. He's, again, not at all charismatic in an obvious sense, is what I mean by that. Quiet and reserved, but very, very kind and gentle, and has a great Dharma eye. So that's what I'm doing in terms of I support so many different organisations, conservation, animals on the edge of extinction, refugees. It's just endless. There's so many causes here, require funding and energy. So they're very dear to me, those particular areas. But then so are so many other ones. So it's endless. It's pretty endless. So our group, Sydney Zen Centre, has had a women's group running since about the late 80s. And we meet once a month and we raise money. We put money in for work for refugees. So that's something we make available to the people who are actually on the ground doing the work. And that's a great thing. We don't have, as I said, the Sydney Zen Centre is not a rich sangha. It's in fact scrambling on the edge of having no money at all. So we're not raising funds. Apart from that, those funds we're not raising for any other group. But there are individuals, in our sangha who, like the head of Doctors for the Environment is one of our people. People go and work with homeless and work in jails, but that's what their individual responses are. So yeah, there's so much work to be done, so much giving to be done.
This has been such a wonderful conversation, and so thank you for taking the time to speak with me, and share so many wonderful stories, and also too, just like there's something very inspiring about hearing how your curiosities uh fed and led to so many wonderful further connections, and just deepenings in general. It's just really, really remarkable.
I agree. It is remarkable, and I just encourage everybody to, be curious and follow your curiosity and follow your heart. Don't put brakes on it. I just want to do a PS. Tony and I lived in a little semi-detached. They're houses that have a common wall, and the guy on the other was an Irishman, lovely man. he worked at the local hotel. So mostly on Saturday nights, he'd come home very drunk and scream at his wife. And then the people out the back loved the races, that's the horse races, and they had the radio on very loud on Saturdays, very loud. And it was a tiny little backyard. So I said to Tone one day, I've heard about a waterfall. It's over there somewhere. Could we go and have a picnic there today? And our little baby was like only in arms at that point. So he said, yeah, let's go. So we went not knowing where this waterfall was, but we found it. And it was in the bush. And then we walked down the road. At the end of the road, there's the river. It was a dead end road. And we looked across the river and there was this old house. And I used to see it going to work because always look at it going to work and think, oh, wonder what about that. Always wondered about it. You always saw it. And there was something white in the window and we couldn't see what it was. So we just thought, let's go and find it as a house. So then we took forever to find it. It was very hard to find. But we found it and we had to go down 80 steps, boom, 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 all the way down. We broke in and the little sign said for sale. And we went, yes. And we're so excited. And we climbed back up the stairs with our little baby. And the lady in the house at the top said, do you like the house, my dears? And we went, yes, we love the house. And she said, oh, well. And she told us how much it would cost. And we immediately made a bid and we immediately got accepted. And then we found out the house was derelict and it had a demolition order on it. Because the lady who asked if we liked it, she had been the owner, but she wasn't allowed to live in it because it had a tenant. And in those days, the tenant was protected. So she just let the house fall down around the tenant until the tenant had to leave. Then she could sell it. But nobody wanted to buy it because she put a covenant on, so you couldn't put a driveway down. You had to walk up and down those 80 steps. That's the only way you could get to it. We didn't care. We just thought, great, that won't worry us. So we bought it, and then we had to make it habitable, which it wasn't. So that was another case of living and working, and that was sort of, I think that was our first adventure in. Well, we rescued that house. We saved its life, and it was a boat shed, and that's where I live now. So it's still got 80 steps.
Wow.
I
But
know.
to follow that little like, oh, I think I see a little white thing in the window, and then to
Yeah,
finally to finally find the house, manage to get
yeah,
up close to it, and then to know that it could be yours, and then the conversation was super fast, and you're just like, it's yours.
right,
Wow, wow. No, so that's inspiring to
yeah,
me too. It's just kind of like, if you're wondering, take a closer look and see what could happen.
yeah.
Gillian, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's been such a
And all the
treat.
best in your future.
Thank you.